The best introduction I can give is actually the reaction that Francine Shaw had when I said that he was coming, which was, Reiser, I've been assigning his readings for decades.
Decades, oh my God.
And I think that speaks volumes about his eminence within the field of instructional design, instructional media, instructional technology. He comes to us from Florida State. We're very lucky that he has relatives in the area, so he was able to sort of pop in to help us kick off a fall semester that is very exciting already, even though it's only a week in. I think you guys saw in the announcement too, if you didn't already know, this is the new Create. Welcome to the new Create, and thanks to Jan and the other Create folks for hosting us here in this wonderful space. Hopefully there are many good things to come in this location. And we are also treating this as our semester kickoff, so hopefully people will have a little bit of time afterwards to stick around and have some snacks and have some wine. I hear reports that an opener is on the way.
It's
so.
here.
It's even here.
Don't worry.
So there will be wine afterwards.
You'll need it after my presentation.
That's your cheese at the end of the maze. You can join us for the first kickoff celebration of ECT EMDL Fall 2011. So without further ado, the illustrious, the kind, and we're ever so glad to have you here.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you for having me. I'm just delighted to be here. I want to thank Chris in particular for setting this up for me. I had read a lot of Chris's stuff when he was at Penn State. I was very impressed, particularly by his efforts to bridge the two fields of instructional design and the learning sciences. And when I was putting together the third edition of my book, Trends and Issues, I told my co-editor, Jack Dempsey, who's a former student of mine, we need to have a chapter on the learning sciences. And I started thinking, who would be a good person to write the chapter? And the first person that came to mind was Chris. And his chapter is just, I don't know if you've read the chapter, but it's really outstanding. It's an attempt to introduce the learning sciences to people who may not have that much knowledge of that field. That included me. And he's done a wonderful job. In fact, I just went back and read the chapter in preparation for my lecture today, and he's done a great job. So you guys are very fortunate to have him and Jan and Francine on your faculty, as well as your other faculty, although I haven't met the others. Anyhow, as you might tell from my accent, I'm originally from New York. Grew up here. My wife and I went to graduate school at Arizona State, then got a job at Florida State, and we said, God, Tallahassee, it's not exactly New York, and we thought we'd be there 3 years. Here it is 35 years later, and we're still in Tallahassee. But the good news is 2 of my 3 children now live back in New York, so we come up here to visit a lot, and I told Chris I'm staying at my daughter's house this weekend, and I'd love to come in and give a guest lecture. He said, be delighted. So here I am. So that's by way of introductions. How many of you were in the program? I don't know the official name of the program. All of you? All right. How many are doctoral students? Master students? Okay, very good. Kind of about the same split.
And some alums.
Oh, who are the alums who are here? Wow, I'm impressed. That's great. That's great. Yeah, well, we have a very similar seminar on Fridays at noon every other Friday. Matter of fact, Chris spoke last spring. When he spoke, I happened to be up here in New York, so I didn't have a chance to hear his presentation. But we think it's a great opportunity for our students to meet people who are in the field, who are doing work in the field, doing research in the field, and I'm sure it's an equally valuable experience for you. I hope that'll be the case with my presentation today. What I wanted to talk about were 10 trends affecting the field of instructional design and technology. Let's see if this clicker works. Okay, so these are the 10 trends I'm going to be talking about. I won't go into any detail about them at this moment. Some of these have been around for a good 20 years or more. For example, the first 2 on the list. Some of them the past decade, some fairly recent, but I think all of them have had a significant influence on our field. Some are ways of thinking about the teaching and learning process, such as the learning sciences, constructivism, performance improvement. Others describe tools or devices for presenting instruction, for creating instruction. But all of them, I think, have had a real significant influence on our field. And I'm not going to go into depth about any of them, but I want to talk briefly about all of them and how I think they've influenced this field. And when I say this field, I call the field instructional design and technology. And before I get into the trends themselves, I want to talk a little bit about why I use that term and what it means to me. So if you look back at the history of the field that some call instructional technology, and which I'm calling instructional design technology, you recognize that early on, this field was viewed as media. If the term that was often used then was, in the early 1900s, was audiovisual materials. And it referred to the media that were popular in those days, films, then in the 1920s, radio, in the 1950s, television. And then more recently, the term audiovisual, instructional, visual materials went by the wayside. And a term that started to be used was the media born of the communications revolution. In the 70s and 80s, computers, and then the internet, and digital video. But in each case, when you use the term instructional technology, what do you usually think of? Or what does the general public think of? They think of media. But our field isn't simply about media. And another way of viewing the field, and those who are instructional designers typically look at it this way, is to think of it as a systematic approach to designing instruction, to designing learning environments. Back in 1970, one of the earliest views of instructional technology as a systematic approach was this one put out by the Commission on Instructional Technology. They talked about a systematic way of designing, carrying out, and evaluating the total process of teaching and learning. You know, some of us might think it's a little strange to think of technology as a process, but actually, if you look at Webster's, and I think this is the most recent online definition, when they define technology, they don't talk about it as media. The very first two definitions in Webster's for technology are the practical application of knowledge. In other words, a process. The viewing technology is a process rather than as medium. And the second one, a manner of accomplishing a task, especially using processes, methods, or knowledge. So this notion of technology as a process isn't as unusual as one might think. So we have two different views of technology. Technology as media, which I think is the term that most of people think of when they think of technology, and technology as a process. And because technology means different things to different people, I'm feeling uncomfortable just calling the field instructional technology, as many people do. So a few years ago, back in 2002 actually, for a new book that Jack Dempsey and I edited, that was the first edition, I came up with this definition of our field. And I'm not going to have you read that whole thing, but it has three different parts that I want to focus on. Let's see. First of all, it acknowledges the fact that this field that I'm calling instructional design and technology, does involve using systematic approaches to designing instruction, designing educational environments. And you can see that in several parts of the definition. They use, most of you are familiar with the term ADDIE, the ADDIE model, the 5 phases. So it incorporates into the definition the various phases of the ADDIE model: analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation, hence ADDIE. And it also mentions the fact that oftentimes people in this field, that I'm calling I, D, and T, use systematic design processes. So it acknowledges that part of the field. It also acknowledges the fact that oftentimes we use a variety of media to support learning, to design instruction, to share information. So that's mentioned as well. And the third thing it includes is performance improvement. So we have three, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Actually, it's the first trend I want to talk about. So we have three different components to this definition of the field that I call instructional design technology: systematic design, use of media, and performance improvement. Now, performance improvement is the third one that's in there, and it's what I consider to be the first trend in the past 20 years to really change the nature of this field that we traditionally thought of as systematic design and using media for instructional purposes. How many are familiar with performance improvement? Just a few. Okay, so what is performance improvement? It's the recognition that as instructional designers or learning scientists, we're not just involved in about trying to improve learning. It's one thing to improve what people learn, but we hope that that learning will be transferred into improvement in real-world performance, that people can do things better on the job, in the workplace, in the real world as a result of our interventions. So, about 20 years ago, people in our field started saying, we not only have to improve learning through whatever means we use, but then have that learning transferred so that the learners can use whatever they learned in the real world, improve their performance in real-world settings. So that's one of the key notions behind the performance improvement movement. The other key notion is that we not only use instructional methods or learning environments to improve learning and performance. We can use a variety of what we call non-instructional means of improving learning and performance. And this is an example of some of these things. Sometimes people will learn more, perform better, simply by providing them with the right motivation. Sometimes better feedback will result in improved performance. I remember when I was chairman of my department, one of my office managers wasn't doing a very good job. I was loath to tell her this because she would get upset. I waited till the end of the year when it was time for the evaluation and then hit her with that. And she looked at me, she said, "If you had this problem with me all year, why didn't you give me feedback when I needed it?" So, sometimes it's not a matter of, I got to put them through a whole new training program. It's just giving people the kind of feedback they need to improve performance. So there's many ways that we can improve learning and performance other than just delivering instruction, setting up a rich learning environment. And that's another key notion of the performance improvement field. It's easy to talk about these things, but are people actually doing them? And here's an interesting slide. It's taken from ASTD, the American Society for Training Development. Every year they come out with a report where they examine, look at that nice bottle of water right in the picture there. They come out with a report where they've surveyed about 300 leading training organizations in the United States and asked them a variety of questions about how they go about improving the performance of their employees. And this is from 2008 report, and it shows you some of the non-instructional methods that these organizations use to improve learning and instruction. You can see things here. Of course, a lot of it is formal learning activities like classes and workshops. And if you look at the red lines, that's how often employees in these organizations use it. You can see about 90% of and those of you who have the slides in front of you, you can see this better than you can up there. But many organizations use formal training methods. But look how many use non-formal methods, like on-the-job learning, almost 90%. Knowledge bases, which I'll be talking about in a few minutes, almost 80%. Performance support, 72%. So all these examples of non-instructional means, not formal instructional means of improving learning are being used very frequently by companies trying to improve the performance of their workers. And I think instructional designers, particularly those of or learning scientists who are going to be working in the business and industry community outside of academia, need to be aware of how to go about improving performance, not just improving learning, and using both instructional and non-instructional methods for doing so. So that's the first of the 10 trends that I'm going to be talking about. The next one is another one that's about 20 years old, and I imagine most of you are familiar with this one. How many are familiar with the theories and ideas behind Construct? I would imagine that in a program like this you'd be well aware of that. But I think it's a very important area and has also greatly influenced our field. Some of the key principles there, which I imagine you're familiar with, is the notion of anchoring instruction to stress the relevance of a task. How often did we sit on classes when we were in high school and say, why the heck am I learning about geometry here? How does this apply to the real world? When we try to anchor our instruction to let learners see how this applies to some real world situations, it's much more likely they can understand the relevance of what we're teaching them and be more likely to pay attention and be motivated to learn it. So that's just one of the key principles from my perspective. And by the way, there's a really great article, now almost 20 years old, by Tom Duffy and one of his students, I'm blanking on who the student is, where they lay out these principles. Does anybody know what the student's name is? Duffy and Savory. John Savory and Tom Duffy. Very good article where they lay out these principles. And other readings discuss it as well. Designing authentic tasks to promote transfer. So trying to set up the instructional environment, the learning environment, so that the tasks that learners have to perform in those environments are similar to the tasks that they have to perform in the real world, thus promoting transfer. Another important principle that I think instructional designers have become more and more aware of as a result of the Constructivist movement. I keep on pointing to that screen. Presenting complex problems to learners rather than simplistic ones as to promote deep understanding, so they have real understanding of the skills, the concepts within an area, rather than superficial, brittle understanding. By the end of this lecture, I'm going to be pointing in the right direction. Every slide, I've been pointing up there. Okay, having learners take the lead in the problem-solving process. Today, I'm taking the lead. I'm leading this lecture. You're sitting there passively, hopefully listening. But I rarely do that, actually, and constructivists argue against us doing that. They really feel learners will learn more if they take the lead in the problem-solving process. That old expression, guide on the side rather than sage on the stage. So the learners take the lead in figuring out how to solve these problems with the faculty member there to guide the learner. I'm going to be talking about that more in a moment. Arranging for learner collaboration, the whole notion of social learning, getting learners involved to working together, understanding one another's perspective so as to learn more. Just like in the real world, we learn a lot from one another. And after the learning process is over, and even doing it, getting learners to reflect upon how they learned and what they learned so as to use that experience to help them in the future as they engage in other learning tasks. So these aren't all of them, but I think these nicely capture some of the key ideas behind constructivism. And as I look back at my career over the past 20 years, I see how some of these things, for example, having learners take the lead, have become more prominent in the way I go about designing my own instruction. And I think they're very valuable processes for instructional designers to be aware of so as to improve the quality of their instruction, the learning environments they design. But there are some challenges with this approach that I think as designers, whether you're designing a learning environment, instructional interventions, you need to be aware of, and I've just mentioned a few here. We need to be careful to select the right instructional strategy in light of the learning task. It isn't always the case that a particular approach is going to work. So depending on what the task is, if it's recalling factual information versus a certain type of problem-solving, conceptual learning, certain instructional strategies, maybe more of a constructivist approach, maybe more of a direct instructional approach, are going to work better. So we have to make sure to match the approach with the task that we're addressing, that we're trying to have our learners acquire. Ensuring learners have adequate prerequisite skills. Sometimes throwing learners into what we call rich learning environments or complex learning environments might be a disservice for them. If they don't have the prerequisite skills to solve some of the complex problems that we're presenting them with, they may have difficulty solving those problems. So I think designers have to be careful to not put learners in situations where they can't solve the problems that are being presented. It results in inefficient learning. Another issue is because with the constructivist approach, learners are often working together to solve problems, and we often look at the solutions to the problems that they come up with as a group as evidence of whether or not they've acquired the skills. One has to be concerned about to what extent has everyone participated in coming up with that solution. Can I be assured when AJ and Sharon and Galdamy, when they are working together, that all of them are equally involved in coming up with that solution? Or maybe Galdamy did all the work and AJ, as usual, just sat back there. No, that's not true. So that's an issue that I think we need to be concerned about as well. And of course, we need to provide adequate scaffolding. You can't put a learner into a rich learning environment and expect them, or a group of learners, to solve the problem at hand without some guidance from the instructor or from the learning environment itself. So it's instructional designers' responsibility, I think, to provide the scaffolding necessary to help these learners solve the complex problems. We can't just throw them in there and expect them to do it. Certainly if we attempt to do that, it's going to be very inefficient. And I think that's the next point is the last one. Efficiency of learning. One might think, and perhaps it's true, that when learners have to solve problems on their own and they come up with the proper solution, they're going to better remember what they learned and be able to transfer it. But it's going to take them longer to do it. And do we want to allow them to take that additional time as opposed to a more direct instruction approach? I'll give you a real good example of this. I had a student do a dissertation about 10 years ago. Her name was Yusra Visser, and she actually won an award for the dissertation, where she compared a constructivist approach to teaching some science content to a direct instruction approach, where the teacher kind of, gave the students the information, gave them some examples, gave them some practice, gave them some feedback, as opposed to throwing them into a rich environment and they had to solve the problems on their own. Actually, the learning in the two groups was about the same. The instructional efficiency, the amount of time taken for the students to learn, was less in the direct instruction approach. But even more telling than that was the fact she had difficulty finding any teacher who would be willing to sacrifice the amount of time necessary for the students to engage in the constructivist learning environment. They didn't want to spend the 4 or 5 days having the students go through the activities to acquire the skills. They wanted to cover as much ground as they could in as little time. So the whole notion of efficiency of learning is something we need to consider. Sometimes we can afford to do that, sometimes we can't. So I think constructivism offers a lot for instructional designers, but there are a number of issues and challenges we have to address when we're looking at that. But it's certainly a trend that has greatly influenced our field in the past 20 years. And even a colleague who's about as far from a constructivist as you can imagine, in my case, Walter Dick, one of my closest colleagues, in more recent editions of his book, Dick and Carey, which is a famous design book, includes some of the ideas of constructivism in his books. I think it's had a major influence on our field. The third trend I want to talk about, I can't sit still, I got to move around. It's actually a very good instructional technique because, if Chris and Jan, they're kind of getting bored and decide to talk to each other, and during my I kind of stand here, and they stop that in chattering. Okay. Or if
dual coding.
Yeah, there you go. There. Let's see. All right.
This is the URL for the slides.
There you go.
Oh.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Very good. Yeah, go ahead and do. Or if AJ raises his hand during the lecture, and I want to call on him, it's nice for me to be standing here rather than over there, because then he's talking to all of us rather than just to me. So I move around a lot. Of course, by the end of the lecture, I'm exhausted, but that's another story. Okay, knowledge management. How many are familiar with that trend? Okay. Let's just talk briefly about that. This is another trend. You want to hold that up again or pass it around?
I'm going to pass it around.
So let's read it here. Real app.
REEL.
app.com, real app, reelapp.com /A, like Apple, 2887D, like my son David. Okay? reelapp.com /A2887D. All right.
So now we get to see if divided attention works.
Okay. All right. Very good. Knowledge management. When you look at this slide taken from AS, again, could you move that bottle of water, please? The one that's kind of, yeah. The slide, you can see back in 2008 when ASTD did the survey, about 80% of the organization, I got two different devices here that I'm trying to, this is the disadvantage of walking around. I'm always leaving things behind. About 80% of the organizations, looking at the red again, said that their employees use knowledge bases, namely, in other words, searchable reference materials, to help them do better jobs, to improve their performance. About another 63% focus on knowledge sharing, communities of practice to help them improve. So this notion of knowledge management is another important issue. Let me describe it in a little better detail. This is a definition from a chapter in my book by Mark Rosenberg, who's considered one of the foremost experts and proponents of knowledge management, and he defines it as this: collecting, archiving, and sharing information, expertise, and insight within and across communities of people and organizations with similar interests and needs. So you have a large company, for example, with offices all around the country. Maybe it's a sales organization. Within that organization, you have various communities of people. You have salespeople, you have office managers, and so on. And different ones of those folks have different expertise, different information, different insights. And what we want to do is to collect all of that information, archive it in some kind of system, and then enable the employees to share that information using this system. And Mark has a very nice slide that he's used in presentations that he's given at Florida State that I've borrowed from him with his permission. And this didn't come out that well. But here's an organization. And on the right-hand side here, there's a whole bunch of different knowledge that is embedded within the organization. There's knowledge about finance, there's knowledge about manufacturing, about IT, and so on. And then you have a bunch of knowledge seekers, and these could actually be the same people in each case. Some of them have technical questions, they have marketing questions, and so on. And what often happens in a situation like this is what we like to call knowledge chaos. People, for example, might have a technical question. So they go to the IT person. They don't have the answer. Well, maybe the training person has the answer. No, they don't have the answer. Maybe the help. Very inefficient way of gathering information from those who have it to those who need it, resulting in knowledge chaos. The solution to this, according to people like Rosenberg and others who've actually created systems like this, is to create what we call a knowledge management system, where you take the information that exists within an organization, organize it in some easily retrievable way in a system. People then access the system and can answer the questions by going to the system rather than looking to the people. This, I think, is particularly important now in the 21st century as the baby boomers start aging, like myself, and are about to retire. So I do have a little bit of knowledge about some things, and if I go off and just leave the university, my knowledge is gone with me. But if they can capture that knowledge and incorporate it into a system, it stays there, and then people can access it even after I'm gone. So taking some of the materials I've created over the years, putting it into a form where it's easily accessible by others, is one way of helping those who need information to get the information efficiently. That's just one example of how knowledge management systems work. And I think there's another trend that's had a great impact on our field, and it's important for instructional designers to be aware of. And we've had over the years at Florida State mini courses where we've taught our students how to create knowledge management systems. Performance support, that's the fourth trend I want. How many are familiar with performance support? All right, it's good. Your instructors are one step ahead of you. That's how it has to be, okay? All right. Even if they're not really ahead of them, let's make them think they're ahead. In my case, the students are usually ahead of me. Here's the same slide that I used earlier, the survey of 300 major training organizations done by the American Society for Training and Development. And the last time I've looked at the 2010 report, but for this particular topic, the most recent data I have is 2008. They noted then that about 72% of the workers of the 300 or so organizations they surveyed were using electronic performance support to help them improve performance in the workplace. You can see this is a frequently used trend. Let me talk about a few examples of performance support. First, let me define it. Frank Nugent, actually it's Frank Wynn, I didn't pronounce that right, has a nice chapter, it's a new chapter in the third edition of my book, and he defines performance support as a system that provides learners with varying levels of access to information and tools that support performance, and this is the key, at the time of need. So getting information to learners when they need it, at the time of need. I'm going to give you a real good example of that in a few minutes from my own career. Here's a couple of examples, the first two of which you should be very familiar with. GPS. How many of us use GPS when they're trying to get around in the car? Sure. You know, I've always prided myself as I don't need a map. I'm great at direction. You know? But since I've started using them, I see how helpful they are in getting to places efficiently and effectively. So even somebody who's a troglodyte like I am, as you can see, I have trouble even advancing the slides, and who loves to think of himself as, oh, I know east from west and north from south, I get anywhere, finds that my performance can be improved at the time I need the information by having a GPS system available for me. So that's an example of a tool. Another good example is income tax preparation software. How many use that when they're preparing their income taxes? Some of the students don't because they don't have enough money to even put together an income, which is good, which is good. Well, it's not so good, actually. I guess it's good that you don't have to use a system. It's bad you don't have enough money to, okay. Anyhow, this is another performance support tool. You are asked a series of questions, you answer the questions, and voila, what comes out? A completed tax return. So it guides you to help you perform a task at the time you have to perform it. Usually it's April 15th, right on the day. And the result is doing a better job performing a task because of the electronic support provided. But here's one more example. This one's specific to Florida State University. About 5 years ago, an accrediting agency, the Southeast Colleges and Universities, something or other, had its, I don't know, annual, every, what do you call 5 years, an accreditation visit to Florida State University. Part of the accreditation visit involved every faculty member on campus sharing with the accrediting agency all their objectives for all of their courses. Who the heck reads that stuff? I don't know. I don't know why these, but we had to collect that. Well, of course, very few faculty have objectives for their courses. Faculty aren't interested. They know in general what they want to teach, but they don't have specific objectives, which is all right. But the accrediting agency needed to have that. My colleague, Walt Wager, who's kind of a technology whiz and has done a lot of work in the performance support area, decided I can do one of two things. Because he was assigned to work with the faculty. I can put every faculty member on campus through an instructional program to teach them how to write objectives. How many of them are going to come? How much time are we going to waste doing that? How many are going to be balking at getting this instruction? Or I can create a performance support tool that will enable them to write objectives in almost no time just by using this tool. And he did the latter, which turned out to be very effective. This is just what one portion of the tool looks like. So he gave them a program. They showed them maybe in a half an hour how to use the program. faculty were given a template, so an electronic template, usually had this, it always had this little statement at the top. Upon completion of the instruction, the student will be able to. Faculty could then choose what verb within Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive outcomes, analysis, and so on, which verb or verbs best characterize the behaviors they wanted their students to acquire. A faculty member would click on this, that would be added to the objective, this would be the behavior, then they'd have conditions and criteria. So using this electronic performance support tool within a very short period of time, he enabled faculty to perform a task they needed to perform without wasting a lot of time and teaching them how to write objectives. This is another example of using performance support tools to enhance learning. Many of our students, for many years, until Walt retired about 3 years ago, we offered on an annual basis a course on creating electronic performance support. And many of our students have found that when they go work for professional organizations, this has been a very valuable skill that's helped them be a more productive member of the performance support team and the design team in the organization they work for. So that's a fourth trend that I think is a very important one that's affected our field. Number 5, online learning. How many of you have taken an online course? Interesting. At Florida State, about 50% of our master students take online courses on a regular basis. About 50% of our I should put it this way, 50% of our master students, and we have about 50 or 60, are online students. So they wouldn't be sitting in the room anyhow, but they take, our doctoral students, it's all face-to-face. But online learning, this is a very hot trend, as I think most of you know, in our profession. And I want to give you some data to support that. First, let's talk about technology-based learning and training in general. I'd like each of you to take a second, we're not going to call on people, but think about training in the business community. In your own mind, what percentage of instruction in the business community do you think is delivered via technology? Not just online, but video, audio conference, I don't know, Skype, as opposed to instructor-led, face-to-face. Everybody come up with a percentage. How much today would you say is instructor-led versus technology-based? Let's get two guesses here. Who'd like to take a guess? Let's put down instructor-led. Who wants to guess what percentage of training today in business industry is instructor-led? Guess. Yes, what's your name?
Oh, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
I'll just say 40%.
40%. How many think she's close? Who wants to have a very different guess? This young lady. What's your name?
Jennifer.
Jennifer.
10%.
10%. How many think Jennifer's close? Interesting. Let's see what the data shows us. Okay, the dark line, the taller line actually in each case, is the amount that's instructor-led, the amount that's technology-based. And this is in over 300 major companies in the United States. So the 40% that Elizabeth says is a little bit closer than Jen's 10%, but both of them are off. You know, in spite of all the technology that we have today, about 60%, and this is 2010 now, this is a 2010 survey, of instruction in major corporations is still presented via live instructor. That's surprising, isn't it? Yeah, I found it surprising. Not so surprising because I started tracking this. I don't know. I started looking at the ASTD surveys in about 2005. They didn't, well, it couldn't have been that yet. Anyhow, the interesting trend, though, is even though still most instruction is delivered via live instructors, look at how the trend is going. Whereas back in 2002, 70% live instructor, now only 59%. In contrast, whereas technology accounted for only 15% of training, this is again in business industry, back in 2002, it's now up to over 36%. So there's a definite trend moving towards what both Elizabeth and Jen are hoping will be the case, or expecting to be the case. So I think this shows you that in general, technology is being used to a greater degree in recent years than in the past, still not to the degree that some of us might have expected. But even more telling than that, because we're talking about online training here, is how the trend is going with online training. Remember, online education didn't really start flourishing till around, I don't know, maybe 2000, somewhere around there. I don't know if the number's correct. But look at how the numbers, again, the 2010 ASTD survey, and they track this every year. This is the number of organizations that respond, and they're usually very large training organizations within major corporations. Only 13% of training was being done online back in 2003, all the way up to 27.5%, double, more than double, from 2003 to 2009. So this is certainly a trend. The percentage of online training has vastly increased. But it's not just in the business environment that it's increased. Let's look at higher education. This is a survey done in 2009, Learning on demand. I forgot if that's, is it Babson? I can't remember who's the parent organization that put together this report. But they surveyed over 2,500 universities, where they got responses from over 2,500 universities, asking them, what's the percentage of enrollment in your programs that are online versus face-to-face? Back in 2002, only 9.6, let's say 10% of enrollments in these 2,500 universities were online. Now, over 25%. More than 2.5 times in a period of, what, 6 years? Another indication that in addition to business and industry, the growth in online learning, great growth in online learning in higher ed. Let's look at one more environment. Oops, get the right clicker here, Bob. K-12. Let's look at this. This is data from Blackboard. Blackboard put out a report just this year, Learning in the 21st Century. Again, a survey, this time of K-12 educators. I think it was principals in schools around the United States, if I'm remembering correctly. Percentage of U.S. students taking online courses. 2008, in middle schools, 9% of kids were taking who were in middle school were taking one or more online courses per year. 2010, more than double, 19%. What about in high school? High school, 2008, 10%, one or more courses per year. 2010, 30%. So we see both in business and industry, higher education, public education, middle and high school, a great growth in the use of online learning. So what does that mean for instructional designers? More online courses, in my mind, mean more opportunities for instructional designers. Why? Why? This is the only interactive part of the presentation, guy. Why do you think I say that more online courses present more opportunities for instructional designers, or we'll see even learning scientists, but why? Anybody want to take a guess there? Francine?
Well, it has to be well designed to be effective, and of course we know everything about design.
Well, we don't know everything about design, but she's exactly right. Of course, our instructors are always right. Instructional design skills, in my opinion, are really necessary in order to prepare effective online courses. It's not just a matter of taking our face-to-face lectures and putting our notes online. That ain't going to cut it, guys. We're trying to promote instructor-student interaction, student-student interaction, active learning activities. To do that, you need somebody who knows how to design instruction. And I'm not just theorizing about this. At Florida State, we have an online learning group. And a number of the employees who work there are the graduates of our program who are there to help instructors make their online courses effective, and interesting. As a matter of fact, when I put my Trends and Issues course online for the first time, maybe 6, 7 years ago, 2 of my former graduates helped me do that because I had no experience in doing it. So I think there are great opportunities for those of us who are in the field of instructional design and technology, learning science, to take advantage of this trend and help it be more effective by designing more effective courses. So this is an important trend for our field as well. This is the first time I've given presentations like this, but I've changed several of the trends here. I'm trying to keep up with the time. Okay, so that's trend 5. Trend 6, informal learning. How many students are familiar with that trend? All right, good. So Jay Cross was generally considered to be one of the gurus in the field of informal learning. He's recently retired, although he's still learning informally. Says it's the unofficial, unscheduled, he's a great speaker too. I've had him speak in my classes via Skype several times. Impromptu way people learn to do their jobs. And a close colleague of mine, Allison Rossett at San Diego State, who has a chapter in my book on this topic, says it's learning other than which typically takes place in a classroom or other formal instructional settings. Let's see what, so these are definitions, and they're only definitions, but let's see what this really means. Before we turn let's first see to what extent it's being used. Again, from the 2008 ASTD survey, they asked the training professionals in these organizations, 300 or so, to what extent does informal learning affect the learning of the workers in your organization? 7% of them said to a very high extent, 34 additional percent to a high extent, so we have 41% saying that informal learning is a major means via which workers in the organizations learn. Another 34% to a moderate extent. So when we add these three together, we have 75% of the organizations saying that informal learning is a major means via which learners in the organization learn. What are some examples of these informal learning techniques? Here's the same chart from that. So you see a wide variety of things here. Email for sharing knowledge, standing around the water cooler. And you know, that sounds kind of funny, but as instructional designers, we can do things to encourage that sort of thing if we think it's an important way of learning. instant messaging, social networking, peer-to-peer coaching, informal lunch and learn, a whole variety of informal ways that people learn from one another. I bet you if you go back and think about how you've learned many of the things that you've learned, whether they're work-related or not, you've learned them informally rather than in a formal classroom. So this is a very powerful tool for getting people to learn, and I think as instructional designers, we need to be aware of it and harness this and make use of it. This is another very interesting slide, from my opinion, Jay Cross put together. He points to the differences between formal and informal learning and tries to show some of the advantages of informal. He says with formal learning, needs are perceived by the instructor. So the instruction or the information is instructor driven, and the instructor is pushing that information out to the learners. As opposed to informal learning, where the information needs are determined by the learner, it's learner-driven, and the learner's trying to pull the information into him or her. Today I was trying to think about if I could give you a good example of that, and I came up with one. And now I'm the Associate Dean for Research in my college, and I have a staff of about 5 or 6 people, and one of their main tasks is filling out all the different forms that the university requires in order for, Jan must be very familiar with this, I'm sure all 3 of your faculty members are. You have to fill out all these forms to be sent into the federal government or the funding agency and so on, and the faculty don't want to take the time to do that. So the faculty plan the research, the staff puts together the forms and submits it. Well, you know, these forms are constantly changing, the university requirements are changing, so our staff was having problems getting these forms done correctly. So one possible solution is to get somebody from central administration to come over there and give a lecture to my staff. And she did that, and 10 minutes into the lecture I'm realizing this wasn't the way to go, because it was instructor driven. It was her perception of what my office staff didn't need to know and what they needed to learn. So a lot of the information she was giving to them was superfluous, just like a lot of the information I'm giving to you right now. No, that's not. Whereas had I let my staff tell her, maybe if I email in advance or collected in advance or just had a discussion with what their needs were, she could better address their problems and give information that would be more useful to them. So informal learning can be a powerful tool that we can use to improve the quality of our instruction, make it more efficient, have our learners learn more. There are a couple of challenges that I think I have challenges up here. Yeah, okay. What I think a good strategy here is for instructional designers is to identify what our workers, our learners are currently doing to learn informally. I'm going to take one more example here. I was thinking about my own department. We have 8 small offices all around one central area. We have a set of 4 chairs set up in a U-shape where people could sit outside of the faculty offices and then come in and talk to the faculty when they had some time to meet with the students or when they schedule a meeting. Led to very little interaction between the students and faculty. The central space was rarely being used. But what we saw then was, occasionally students would have conversations out in the central area. They'd come into a faculty member's office and talk to the faculty. But the central area used very, very infrequently. What's the desired situation? We wanted much more interaction between the faculty and the students, not just in individual offices, but in the central area. So more faculty get involved, more students get involved, a richer, more vibrant learning environment. So we compared the current ways people were learning informally, talking to one another, but in small offices, not having much sharing with larger groups, versus the desired, and then rearranged the space, the workspace, where we put several large tables in the outer area where students and faculty could congregate, made it a more comfortable area, set Wi-Fi up there, so as to increase the likelihood that students would engage in and faculty in the informal types of learning activities we were trying to promote. So I think the challenge for instructional designers is to focus on informal mechanisms for learning as well as formal, and try to promote the informal as well. That's trend 6. Trend 7, social media, and I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are heavily involved in this, and some of the research your faculty are doing is in this area. Here's a formal definition and collection of web. I won't even read that one to you, but you know what it is. Here's some examples, and again, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of them. Let's see the extent to which social media is being used in various environments. First, for work-related learning in business and industry. Here again is a survey. This is from ASTD in the July 2010 issue of their major journal. This again is a business and industry kind of publication. Training and development. asking organizations what type of social media do they use. SharePoint, Google Docs, over 42% use it often or all the time. You can see the numbers there. It goes down from there. But there's a good number. It's 20%, 15% using social media. And I'm pretty confident, or at least I'm predicting, we'll see these numbers increasing in the next year or two, so next few years. So organizations in business industry are using social media for work-related learning. What about K-12? Here's a survey of K-12 educators. It's the green line, that's the one you should be looking at. They asked teachers, to what extent are you using social media in your classroom for instructional purposes? The numbers aren't all that impressive, but it's okay. About 20% or maybe 18% using YouTube. Teachers are using Wikipedia. How they're using it, I'm not sure, but it looks about 30%. Blogs. So we see some use of social media in K-12 classrooms. I think it's kind of encouraging because a lot of media have rarely been used. I like to see these numbers go up, but this isn't bad for a start. What else do we have here? Higher education. This was a survey done by Pearson in 2010. Again, I've forgotten the N here, so I wish I had that for you. As a matter of fact, I tried to look it up yesterday, but didn't get around to it. But anyhow, among those surveyed, it was faculty in higher education. Over 60% said they used social media in their class. About 30% said they posted content via social media for class. Imagine they had YouTube videos on there and so on and urged their students to look at it. I'm not exactly sure how they used it. They said about 40%, the scale is different on the bottom chart here, but about 42% said they assigned students to read or view various things on social media, and about 20% said they had students post things using social media. So I think, we're talking about K-12, higher ed, business industry. We see a moderate amount of use of social media in those environments. I think that's going to increase, and I think instructional designers, learning scientists need to be aware of this trend and take advantage of it. And I think there's some challenges there too. Choosing the right media tools for various, I'm going to use a blog. I'm going to have a blog in my class. No matter what the class, they're going to blog. I don't think that's the way you go about it. Like any good instructional designer, you need to choose the right tool depending upon the type of learning task that you want your learners to engage in, the skills you want them to acquire. I'm big on providing structure and scaffolding. Too often I see faculty telling students, create a wiki, work together on that, create a blog, giving them very little structure or scaffolding or support as to what to do with the tool. Just use the tool. I think it's very important that we provide structure and scaffolding for our students so as to help them acquire whatever goals we're hoping they acquire. Not just has them engage in some activity, because the activity is something that's hot today or interesting. This is another one that's a hot button for me. Having social media, having online available, doesn't remove the instructor from his obligations or her obligations. Instructors supposedly have subject matter expertise. They certainly have a lot of experience. That doesn't mean students don't. I often learn more from my students than they learn from me, or at least as much. But the instructors do have some knowledge and expertise that they're expected to share with their students. I don't have to be the sage on the stage, but I should be the guide on the side. And just allowing my students to post things and say, look at it, and judge each other's work and assume that's how they're going to learn, to me, is not the proper way to be teaching or supporting learning. So I think it's very important for instructors to have an important role in both presentation of content, even if it's just helping students evaluate one another's postings, and certainly in providing feedback. So I think instructional designers have to make sure that when social media are used, when online learning is the tool via which instruction is being delivered, that there's a role, an appropriate role for instructors, and they're not just sitting back and letting the students take over because it's the easy thing to do, or it's the popular thing to do. That's my opinion. Pretty strong about that one. Okay, educational games. All right, you have a couple experts in this area, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Val Shute, who Jan knows very well, and I think that they may even have worked together, certainly talked to one another, has a very nice definition for educational games. You can look at that briefly. I won't read it. Here's one such example. I should have used Jan's examples, but here's one. I'm sure you're familiar with from Indiana, Quest Atlantis. As of yesterday, they had over 65,000 users. You can't read it very well. Over 65,000 users of that game. Val has a very nice slide, and again, these slides will be available for you after the presentation, so I'm not going to go into detail about it. But she lists what she thinks are 6 of the most important features of well-designed games. I think they're great. Problem-solving challenges that are adaptive based upon the learner's performance, upon his or her skill levels. Clear goals and rules for the games. High degree of learner control. Motivational. Sense of uncertainty, so the learner doesn't automatically know what's going to happen next. And ongoing feedback provided within the context of the game. I think this is very nice, and I'm sure that we could add some to it. Maybe Jan would have some suggestions for that. But I think I adapted this from a very nice presentation Val gave last year at AERA. As a matter of fact, Francine, you'd be interested in this. She gave it during a debate with Richard Clark on the value of games. Richard, as usual, was saying, oh, games don't make a difference, media don't make a difference, I don't make a difference. No, he doesn't say that. Val is really thought through a lot, and I really like her work there. Again, I think there's some challenges with regard to games. How do we design games to promote the attainment of specific learning goals? As an instructional designer, and originally taught as kind of a behaviorist, although I think I've gotten beyond that, I think we need to have specific goals in mind when we have our students engage in a specific activity, be it working through some rich learning environment or playing a game or engaging in a class discussion. We should have some specific goals in mind. And then we need to design our interventions, games among them, to help learners attain those goals. How do we go about doing that? I have some ideas about it. But how do we measure whether or not they've attained those goals? Do we measure it simply by their success in the game, or are there other ways that we measure that? Maybe the game is the learning activity, but we measure whether they've attained the goals in some other manner. How do we address the issues of instructional efficiency? Games oftentimes take a long time to play. Do organizations, be they a K-12 classroom, a company that's a training organization, are they going to be willing to have their learners engage in the game for X amount of time, given all the other things that these learners must do, whether it's working in the field, on the job, learning other things in the classroom? So these are issues I think instructional designers need to address. I love games. In the 70s, when I was in graduate school, I can't believe it was that long ago, one of the first courses I took was simulations and games, but of course then it was board games. And I'm so sorry I didn't stick with that, because 40 years from now I'd be as successful as Jan is. But I think it's a great area, but I really think these are issues we need to address. And as instructional designers, we need to address them. Number 9, we're almost done. Learning sciences. How many are familiar with that? If you're not, you're out of the program, guys. All right, so I'm not even going to go over these. Focus on deep conceptual understanding. I think it's a great and important concept. Creating learner-centered learning environments. Again, excellent. I love this one. Using technology, but not just to present instruction. To create rich learning environments. Create tools that learners can use to demonstrate their learning, to create content. I think it's wonderful. To enhance your understanding. When Clark came out with his piece that media don't make a difference, I said, that's nonsense. Media provides affordances that certain media provides certain affordances that other media could not possibly show. How can we show reactions in physics if we don't have slow motion devices to show them? How can we show in quick time some real time changes that might be, take 2 months, 2 years to show? Media enable us to do it. So media can really enhance understanding. So I think focusing on using media, as the learning scientists suggest, is very important. Accounting for the social nature of learning, again, related very closely to the constructivist notion of learner collaboration, very important. Got 4 more. Design for transfer, study in the real-world settings, not the lab, very important. Too many of the studies we do today are the old ed psych studies where it's in a controlled environment and has no real-world relevance. I love the real-world settings for research. Matter of fact, a lot of my research over the years, be it kids learning from Sesame Street, a variety of others, real-world settings. Examining learning from anthropological, sociological, as well as psychological perspectives, and conducting design-based research on the design process. Learning scientists are big on this, but people in the instructional design field, like Jim Klein and Rita Ritchie, who talk about design and development research, emphasize this as well. The notion of looking at the design process and how it helps improve learning, and how, as a result of learners learning or failure to learn, we can improve the design process. Wonderful area to conduct our research in. So I think this is another very important area. I think there's a couple of issues there, and then we're going to hit the last trend. I think for instructional designers now, not so much for you guys who are mainly focusing on the learning science, we need to have a better understanding. About 2008, I knew very little about the learning sciences. I had a colleague in Japan, Katsuaki Suzuki, a former student of mine, took a sabbatical at Florida State. I offered him the sabbatical. I said, if you teach a course on the learning sciences, I co-taught it with him. I knew nothing about the learning sciences at the time. I used the book, what is the handbook, Cambridge Handbook on Learning Sciences, and I got a better understanding. I'm no expert, but I learned about it, I saw the value of it, and I think instructional designers need to learn more about the learning sciences, and I encourage them to do so. As a matter of fact, I'm giving the same lecture in 2 weeks at Florida State, and this will hit home with them because our students need to learn more about it. The course hasn't been offered since Katsu and I taught it, but we have the faculty who could teach it. Identify those types of learning outcomes that could be fostered by particular strategies. Are we talking about goal-based scenarios? Are we talking about case-based learning, cognitive apprenticeship? What strategies are likely to work for what types of learning outcomes? Again, tying the strategy to the learning outcome. And unless we're aware of the strategies, we can't tie them to the learning outcome. So we need to become aware of them and then pick the right ones. But not only pick the right ones, decide how those strategies can be blended with traditional instructional design practices and use the best of both worlds to create even better learning environments, better interventions. And finally, working with learning scientists. Chris had a wonderful special issue of Ed Tech a few years ago that he co-edited with Ali Carr, and they talked about the differences and similarities between the learning sciences and instructional design and the need for these folks to work together, to build upon the strengths of both worlds. And I really believe in that. So I think getting learning scientists and instructional designers to work together in design and research activities is a very valuable and important thing to do. And at Florida State, because we have some people who have their feet mainly in the instructional design camp, like myself, and others who have their feet mainly in the learning sciences camp, like Val Shute and Vanessa Denon, we're starting to move in that direction. Penn State was, but then Chris up and left and came to a good place, lucky for you guys. So I'd like to see more of that. Hopefully there'll be some of that here at NYU. Finally, trend number 10, and then we'll be done. And you're all saying, thank God. Mobile learning. Mobile learning. This is one that hasn't had a major effect on our field yet, but I'm guessing, hypothesizing that it will. And of course, you all know what mobile learning is all about, learning that's supported by mobile devices, whether it's an iPhone, a tablet PC, iPad, which I just got one a few weeks ago. I'm enjoying immensely. iPods, whatever, all those devices. And how is this going to be affecting our field? Well, there's a lot of stuff that tells us it will be. Here's an article just from 2 months ago, July, from Training and Development Magazine, a major publication for designers in the field of business and industry. The headline, Mobile Learning. And this is the headline from the article. According to new ASTD, that's the major organization of American Society for Training and Development, 65% of employers are either using, considering, or currently developing learning for mobile devices, using mobile devices to help workers in the workplace learn their jobs as they're performing them. 2 weeks ago, an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Every year they put out a special issue called Almanac of Higher Ed, where they present multitude of tables and figures. The key article about technology, college tech goes mobile. And here's AJ, who was telling me on the way over here that he's trying to push that a lot at Montclair State University. And it's happening all over the country. So in higher education as well as in business industry. Next. This was really interesting to me. An Education Week, which is a K-12 publication, let's say the premier K-12 publication about news and education in K-12. Schools open doors to students' mobile devices. This was really an eye-opener. More schools, this is the headline. More schools are doing an about-face as they change policies to allow the use of student-owned mobile. It used to be no devices in my own classes. I tell students, I don't want you to have your computers in the classroom because I don't want you browsing the internet while we're having discussion. But we have to change our thinking about that. And you see schools are changing their thinking about that. This article was pointing that out. So we see higher education, K-12, business industry, open to using mobile devices. I think this is going to be a major trend affecting our field, and we need to be on top of it if we're going to have an effect on it. Here's one more statistic. This was from a study that Blackboard did, taking it mobile. Unlike other technologies where parents think it's the teacher's or the school's responsibility to provide the computer, to provide the televisions, to provide whatever the medium is, parents in the survey, 62% they said were willing to purchase mobile devices for their children to use at school. Only 11% said it was the school's responsibility. So here we have a technological innovation that parents are willing to purchase for their kids so their kids can use it in schools. So here's some of the advantages of mobile devices. Relatively low cost, less cost than a lot of other technologies than buying computers. Reduces the digital divide because of the low cost. Kids who come from poorer families often have mobile devices as kids who come from better off families. Unlike so many technologies where we have to rearrange the classroom to put in computers, to put in a video, we don't have to rearrange the physical space, which is a big problem for teachers. Big problem for teachers. They don't want to have to rearrange the space to make use of the technology. Portability, very portable, so anytime, anywhere learning, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. As a matter of fact, a lot of the stuff that I used to tell my students, hey guys, we'll continue this lecture on Tuesday, or this discussion on Tuesday. I now say, okay, you're working in small groups, go home, post your answers, your team posts their answers on the Blackboard site. I want each group to take a look at each group's answers, decide which answers are best, write your answer. So you can use mobile devices to continue learning outside of the classroom. And unlike a lot of technologies where teachers in particular are uncomfortable with the technology because they don't know how to operate it, almost everyone now is pretty comfortable, even somebody like me. Soon every lecture will be delivered via film. Did it happen? No. 20 years ago, it was said that computers would blow up the schools. There would no longer schools. Did it happen? No. But computers are having a greater impact than almost every other medium that has come along. So we got to be careful not to just jump on the bandwagon without examining the value of the medium. So and then to do that, for mobile learning as well for all our other interventions, we've got to design good software, and you as learning scientists and instructional designers can do that, building the principles of good design, consider theories of learning to design good educational software. A very key point is thinking about how we can integrate the use of these devices into a regular school curriculum. We're not going to blow up the school tomorrow. Schools, in my opinion, schools are going to be there. We're talking about K-12 now. Going to be there for a long time. Teachers in college classrooms like me are going to be there for a long time. So we have to figure out how to integrate these devices into the regular curriculum so they're not seen as a side activity, but are integrated into the instruction. The most effective uses of media historically have been those that have been integrated into the curriculum. There's a lot of evidence to show that. And eliminate distracting influences. The tendency to text while we're engaged in some educational activity, the tendency to surf the web, not always the best thing to be doing. So how can we control for that? Elliot Soloway had an interesting statement about that. He said the first thing we do is eliminate the texting abilities and the web surfing. But when you do that, what's left with the mobile? I'm not sure what the answer is, but he had that statement. Okay, so these are some of the challenges for designers. Let me conclude. When I was graduating from instructional design program at Arizona State in the mid-'70s, I hate to admit it, I was only 10 years old at the time. That was a joke, guys. I really had a small toolbox. They had taught me the basics of instructional design. We'd heard all about behavioral learning theory. We were starting to learn a little bit of cognitive learning theory, but there wasn't a whole lot over and above that, okay? But that's really changed. Now, today, you guys have a much larger set of tools you can use. Among those tools are all the different learning theories, technological advances that I've talked about today, and many, many others. So as a result of having that larger toolbox, I think there's a greater likelihood that you're going to choose the right tool for the right task. For a learning task, you have a much wider variety of tools to choose from. If you choose the right tool, I really do think it's going to have a positive effect on learners, on their learning, on their motivation, and on their performance. And as a result of that, I think you're going to have greater success in your professional career. I certainly hope that's the case, and I want to say thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Comments and questions? I just wanted to point out that we are, in fact, in the middle of having people tweet about this very talk, and that people, your talk was actually sort of discussed a little bit while it was going on in the back channel. And I also just learned that Dana Boyd is now joining MCC. So isn't that interesting?
Really?
Many of the things I think that Bob was talking about are very much relevant in not just in our professional practice, but also in our lives here in the department as students, as we try to figure out how to, follow along with the slides and not get too distracted, but maybe also have some Twitter open and try to keep some back channel. I think AJ just became the mayor of the Create Lab. So,
and I'm trying to adjust all these changes.
Exactly. But I'm sure Bob would entertain questions or comments if there are any.
And I'm sorry it took about 10 minutes longer than I anticipated, but I hope it was worthwhile. But I'd be glad to answer any questions or take any comments, as long as they're not too critical, okay? All right, even if they are critical. Yeah, Jan.
Actually, on your last point of mobile devices, mobile media, I think that the combination with another point you had, which is informal learning, is far more powerful than us trying to integrate mobile devices into our classes. That seems in a way forced, because you could have another device sitting in front of you and that would also work. But I'm much more excited
That's interesting. I think that's a very interesting point. So using that more for informal. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I'm much more excited about is when you go to Korea, when you go to Japan, people are on the phone, on their trains, commuting to work, and they're not playing necessarily games, they do that. But they're on applications like there's one called I Know, where they learn languages on the phone while they're on the train. Because they have 4G or better networks, they have smartphones that are by far outperforming what we have. And they have, as a result, providers that provide those kind of environments. So I think we can look there to see what, once we finally upgrade our cellular systems here, we might see happening here when we have the bandwidth that we need for that. So that's already happening elsewhere, and the trend is primarily, from what I see, mobile and informal learning.
That's interesting. That's going to actually change my slide for the next presentation to mention that. Do you think there's a place for mobile learning within formal learning environments, or do you think not? What's your opinion on that?
I think there's a place for it. It's not you know, why not? I mean, sure, we can incorporate a lot of things into our teaching, but I could use a desktop to send that tweet, or I can use a mobile device. That's not going to be, that's the medium again, right?
Mm-hmm.
The device better. What I'm much more interested in that, and you had that as one of the items, I would just highlight that, is the anytime, anywhere. You know, on my way home, I have this idea, and I can then still be in touch. Or on my way to class, I have this question to my instructor, and I can send that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do that now. So playing up on that and using that, that's good. That's good. Other comment, and again, I'm going to put that on my slides next.
Well, something that I worry
What's your name, by the way?
Jacob.
Jacob?
Yeah.
Okay.
Something that I worry about, though, about in terms of mobile learning is that is the digital divide issue really avoided? I mean, I think special attention has to be paid to, you know, there are all these features that we can take advantage of, but are all those going to reach everybody? I mean, students will have access to different levels of different mobile devices, and how do you balance, you know, trying to take advantage of new features versus trying to make things, you know, available to as many people as possible?
I don't know what the answer for that is. Certainly the mobile devices that we're using now, I think, are fairly accessible to a large number of people. Some of the other technologies may not be the case. Also, when you talk about, there's different audiences that we're trying to reach. I know a lot of your focus, if I'm not mistaken, in your program is K-12 and higher ed. Isn't that correct? I mean, your audience for the interventions you come up with, are they mainly K-12 and higher ed, or do you get into business and industry environments as well?
To some extent. How many people, okay, just as a quick demo for Bob, how many people are interested in or do something with kids in K-12? How many people are interested in or do something with students in higher ed? How many people are interested in younger students in out-of-school or informal environments? And
wow.
How many people are interested in adults in non-formal environments? Yeah.
And how about adults in the workplace? How many are interested in that? Okay. So I think it depends on what environment we're interested in. And I think some of the issues you raised apply to most of the environments that Chris mentioned. It's interesting, at Florida State, I'd say if we asked the same set of questions, most of the hands would go up for how many interested in working in business and industry and training organizations. So a lot of it depends on the organization. But I do think it's an issue. I don't have the answer for the question. Less so in business industry where they provide the devices oftentimes for the employees. Yeah?
The digital divide, though, nowadays is being kind of reimagined or redefined as not an access issue. It's even under or low advantaged populations have access to a lot of technology. It's a question of how they use it. So it's a completely different use of the same technology, and the kind of guidance that parents would give their children in how to use that technology and the kind of culture in how to use that technology. And it's fascinating to read that in the context of gaming, when you look at different kind of populations and what kind of games they're playing, and what that actually says about their way of looking at games as a medium. And that spans other kind of genres as well. And so it's not so much the access anymore. There are enough libraries, there are enough, you will see people with smartphones of essentially all parts of our society. It's more the question of what they do with it, I think. And so that's really where we as instructional designers can have an impact. If access were an issue, then we couldn't, because we wouldn't reach them. Now it's a question of actually making something we build available and build in enough scaffolds that people who may not have had the benefit of parents that guided them to use it in a certain way, or their culture of guiding them in a certain way, that they actually have the benefit of that application as well.
Jennifer. No, that's Jennifer right here. That's Jennifer. Jennifer to the right.
No, I'm Ophelia.
Hi.
Yes, but just you mentioned libraries and access, and you were talking about integrating this into the formal curricula, and it's sort of like, well, which comes first? Do we do the design so that it becomes integrated into the curriculum, or do you try and push to get the technology integrated into the curriculum so that you can then design for it? It sort of is this bit of a conundrum of which is the best place to push, or do you work on both fronts at the same time in order to make sure is access to public libraries? Yes, that works with computers, but mobile devices, I don't know of any library where you can go and check out a mobile device, and classrooms that have it. Are they the lower income, lower SES neighborhoods and towns and schools within those districts, and where are the different sort of points, the different nodes where you can apply that, your work, or direct your research and your work toward that point in order to achieve whatever the set goal is.
Well, Jan is suggesting that maybe with mobile devices, he said this pretty well, is that perhaps we don't need to worry about integrating into the curriculum, because it's mainly going to be used as an out-of-school, anytime, anywhere, any place tool for learning. And whereas other media, we've tried to, and perhaps rightly so, integrate into the curriculum without much success, unfortunately. But this might be an exception to that. Jan, would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, because when you think about mobile media, you're talking about the device that gives you access. And then you talk about a number of your other trends, like social media. Now you talk about an actual app, right? And so the app social medium can, or the variety of apps that it entails, can be used on mobile devices or on stationary devices. And so integrating it into the classroom where there are a lot of stationary devices, counting a laptop, I suppose, or a PC, doesn't make it so much a focus on mobile devices as much as on what you run on them.
Yeah.
And that can run on other platforms as well.
And of course that brings up the whole issue that we shouldn't say media don't make a difference, because they certainly do. But the notion that it's how we design the applications that are delivered by the media that's crucial is something we can't forget. So I think there's been this debate over the years about is it media or is it methods, and I really think it's both. I think mainly as designers we have to be good at designing our interventions. But it doesn't mean we should ignore the issue of the value of media, which provides certain affordances. Some media provides certain affordances that others don't. So, decide what you want to teach, design a good intervention, and then decide what medium can best be used to deliver it. I think that's the way I would suggest we do it. Yes?
Something that this whole conversation brings to mind for me is this idea of cultural practice, and how much do we take on as educators when it comes to certain kinds of cultural practice around using media. Because the digital divide for me, I teach a class at CUNY, and I've seen such stark differences between the efficacy that CUNY students have coming in, even though they have the access to the same technology, that has something to do with the fact that they were once the products of the digital divide, or maybe their parents were. So they didn't necessarily have the same types of cultural practice when using media. So it almost becomes a civics lesson to some degree. Like, how do we get people on the same playing field when it comes to the ways in which we can use technology effectively beyond, so that they can access the applications that we develop, and the different affordances of using social networks and technologies. Like, that almost has to become part of our dialogue as well.
So much nicer than
I said it, but that's what I meant.
Yeah. Well, is this all under the category of digital literacy and teaching digital literacy? We have a couple of faculty at Florida State who do work in this area. So I think it is an important area, I agree. But that's true with almost everything. Okay. Well, almost any medium. You know, kids have always had television in their homes, so most kids have. There have been books and people that come out of it. But you know, how they use these devices and for what purposes, you know, there's always been some kind of divide there, I think, and how do we overcome those differences?
I think it was about 2 years ago we began this course, this one-point course for teacher education students, both undergrads and graduate students. And we did use a lab. And at one point we were told that we might not have access to a lab. And we might have to have the students bring their laptops. And the undergraduate advisors were hostile because they said that their undergraduates, by and large, I mean, there was no consistency. A lot of them did not have computers. That was only 2 years ago at this university. So that difference in access is significant, I guess, still, even in a context like this.
And even just to throw in one more point, so, you know, there's the access issue, there's the do you have the cultural resources issue, and then there's also the preference issue. So one thing I was just looking through the chart that Bob pulled from ASTD about percentage of technology-based training, how much was face-to-face and how much was online. And you look at from 2002 to 2009, the online training more than doubled, and the face-to-face training only went down by about, you know, up to 20%-ish. But the numbers don't track each other, and they don't add up to 100%. So there's actually got to be a fair amount of blended training in there to make it add up to 100%. And the amount of blended training was slowly growing, and the amount of online training was growing. But where there's a huge drop-off, it looks like the technology-based training was growing without necessarily cannibalizing too much of the face-to-face training until the financial crash in 2008. So all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of people who, you know, we could do it by Skype, we could do it face-to-face, I don't know, we've got our training budget this year, we already bought our plane tickets. And then, you know, someday somebody says, oh, stop spending money, and all of a sudden everybody moves to Skype and or blended learning. And that, to me, that's really interesting too, because it just goes to show that sometimes these things are not necessarily strictly access or strictly, you know, do you have the cultural resources to take advantage of the technology, because that was already steadily climbing. It's more a question of, do you have to choose one over another, and under what circumstances, and, you know, would it make sense to, you know, allow people to bring laptops if they choose to a class, but provide laptops for those people who don't have them, versus insisting everyone use the machine in the room, versus, you know, assuming everybody has a laptop or providing them with one.
Well, part of this conversation is the fact that NYU decided that enough students had their own laptops that they could do away with the labs. And they did, in fact, eliminate the majority of lab space. So the university was counting on not investing money in labs where classes could be held. And I'm talking about like our courses where the computers were significant to the instruction, not just so that they could take notes or cruise or, you know, whatever. But the university was counting on that. And this is a trend across the country, actually. I remember reading a couple of articles. We weren't first, right?
Yeah, but yet at the same time, they have a virtual computer lab, but it's still very much a pilot, and there are a lot of bugs with it. So they didn't, you know, they acknowledged there would be a transition time between having all of this lab space to going down to this much lab space, and then adding the virtual computer lab. But they're not, and I don't know if that's purposeful in terms of everyone readjusting and just making do with the resources that are available.
Well, what it means is that they're only piloting access to what's on the university servers. So if you're not on a university computer, you don't have access to it.
You can do the VCL from home.
Can you get everything?
No. but that's what, it's still piloting, there are a lot of bugs, there's a lot of functionality you can't do if you're working on a map, it's a
So even if you have a
computer.
computer, you couldn't.
Even if you have a computer and you have a strong enough internet connection to sustain, you know, your wireless at home or your internet speed at home, I mean, can sustain the connection because, say if you're using Photoshop, which is an expensive program that you might only use a couple of times a year, so why would you buy it? You're like, oh great, I don't have to go to the computer lab, and you're opening up a large file and it crashes. And you open up a large file and it crashes. And there's certain things you can't do in like SPSS, and so there's all these bugs, and this is what I mean in terms of the administration. I don't know what their intentions or their mentality behind it is, but they said it was going to be a transition. They would have this institute to make up for the lack of lab space and access, and so for people it's like, you can't really use it, you either go to the computer lab or you wait, you know, finals time, you're waiting frantically for the computer to be open, or you buy software. And so this is the situation where it's set up so it's as much about access and affordances and culture. You know, all of those things I think are sort of co-equal in creating a space in which people can or cannot make use of, you know, things like that.
Well, finances are a big issue here too, and you're fortunate to have faculty who have grant money, because at Florida State we have less and less university support for any kind of labs. So having faculty who get grants, bring in grant money, and create spaces like the spaces that I see up here, you don't realize how lucky you are to have, maybe you do realize it, but you're very lucky to have a space like that, because it becomes harder and harder to provide it. Yes?
I had a question kind of related to that, because I was looking at your slide with the online learning numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically kind of with like middle school and high school. I was wondering, is that, you know, online classes exclusively, or is it blended? And was
I
it
don't know. I
provided by the
think
school
that's
district?
exclusive. You know, we have the Florida virtual school system, and there's a
Right.
new law in Florida that every high school, I think this is because of our governor, who's very big on privatization, every high school, and the profits that accrue to his well, I'm going to go every high school student must take at least one course totally online.
Oh, really?
So I have I'm not sure, yes,
Really
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Huh.
So I'm not sure, you have to go back, and I have the sources list, but I have a feeling that's courses that are totally online as opposed to blended, but I'm not positive.
That's what it looked more like that because it was lower numbers.
Yeah.
So I was wondering.
I think that's the case.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you again for the time. I really enjoyed it.
And we want to thank you so
Okay,
much
I'm
for coming and talking.
delighted.